everyone, and welcome to the Propcast. My name is Louisa Dickens, co-founder of Elmore Re and board director of the UKPA, and I shall be your weekly host. Each week for 30 minutes, we'll be connecting the VCs, prop tech startups, and real estate professionals globally, and assist in bridging that famous communication gap we all love talking about. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Propcast. Today, we will be talking with Paraag, CEO and co-founder of Rhino, and we will be discussing financial flexibility and the power of choice. So welcome, Paraag.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here and chat with you today.
Awesome. Now, for those who are listening, Paraag is the CEO and co-founder of Rhino, as I just mentioned, and Rhino is a builder of products and services that gives renters a more affordable way to live the homes they want. I mean, it's already got my vote. Now, since its founding in 2016, Rhino has made it a mission to replace cash security deposits with low-cost, affordable insurance. The product is now offered in over 1 million homes across the US. Rhino offers hundreds of thousands of renters a choice to eliminate high upfront security deposits with a low-cost insurance that can start as low as $5 a month. Before co-founding Rhino, Paraag led a property management and development company with over $100 million worth of assets. And I guess in that time, learned really firsthand the pain points he'd go on to address with the creation of Rhino. He also served as City Hall policy advisor and aided in administration of the New York City Mayor, Michael Bloomberg. And he's also spent a fair bit of time in investment banking at Goldman Sachs and graduated from New York University with a bachelor's and master's degree in economics. So welcome to the Propcast, Paraag. Now, enough from me. I would love to hear a little bit more about, I guess, your whole journey to co-founding Rhino. So please go for it.
Sure. I think things like this are much easier to understand in hindsight. And so I'm glad I have the chance to reflect on this, now. And really, I think, for me, the biggest takeaway is that all of those bits you kind of touched on walking through my bio are really, kind of all components of why Rhino. We operate our business today at the intersection of two of the most regulated industries, out there, financial services and insurance as one, and then real estate. And, I think for me, pretty uniquely, having spent time in finance, in working in government, working in real estate, and working in startups, really is, a mashup as to sort of what brought me to the point, of being on this podcast with you here today. It really does kind of touch on and draw on all of those different pieces. And I think, another thing that I think I've found more and more important for me as I've gone through my professional career over the last 15 years is I, have grown to have a sort of worldview that you don't just need to kind of work on something that, checks one of two boxes. You can actually check both boxes. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes people end up following, the American dream or the American capitalist dream of making $1 million or whatever it is. And that often comes at the expense of something that is a little bit more personally fulfilling or mission driven. What we do at Rhino every day, what I do every day, is very much squarely both of those things. I have a strong profit motive and want to build a successful business. But at the same time, I want to help people. And I don't feel like, the only two ways you can do that in 2020 are working at a not-for-profit charitable organization or, working for Philip Morris selling cigarettes. I think what we do really very squarely checks both of those boxes, which is what I'm so excited about every morning. I, get up and not go to the office, but log on to Zoom, I guess.
Yeah. And I think now tell us and tell the audience a little bit more about your product, and how it makes housing more affordable.
Absolutely. And I guess what I'll start by saying is that it sounds pretty dead simple. What we do is make renting much more financially affordable for people at the time of move-in. So everybody that's been a renter or knows a renter is accustomed to paying first month's rent and a security deposit, which is typically equal to first month's rent, sometimes even more, at the time they move in. What we've done is created a brand new insurance product that replaces that cash security deposit with a low monthly fee. So instead of paying something like, call it $1,000 equal to first month's rent when you move into a home, you can instead buy insurance from us, which will cost $4, $5, $6 a month. And you get to keep that $1,000 as a renter. And really important for everyone to understand also is that it's providing the same protections. That insurance certificate that we give to the landlord provides them with the same protections that they otherwise would have relied on that cash security deposit for. But guess what? It's 2020. And there's really no reason that something that's sort of, as you know, I often think about it as obtuse or blunt as literally $45 billion that's sitting in these individual tenant segregated escrow accounts across the country. You know, that's just not the best way to protect somebody from something that may or may not happen in the future. And so that's what we've done is we've created a really low cost insurance product that gives landlords what they need to have peace of mind and feel like they're protected, but at a fraction of the cost for renters.
It sounds pretty much like a no-brainer. I mean, I'm a renter myself, and that's the whole upfront cost. I think especially for everyone at every point in life, it's a huge amount to put up front. And if you can have, I guess, get the insurance, less upfront costs, and also have that security that you mentioned, well, yeah, like I said, it's an absolute no-brainer. Now, tell me a little bit more about the impact, and can you sort of go into, can we sort of look at micro and sort of macro levels as well?
Yeah, sure. I'll take those in reverse order. You know, at the macro level, I mentioned this number, $45 billion, just to kind of unpack that a little bit. That's literally the amount of money that is sitting in these escrow accounts that landlords hold on to, just in the United States, just across the United States of America, and residential rental apartment escrow accounts. So that's money that just sits there in case something happens, right? So it's renters' money that they don't have access to and can't invest. They can't use to, you know, manage other life expenses, all because it's, you know, maybe there's going to be something that happens. And really, you know, if you think about that $45 billion and returning that to the millions of renters across the country, there's some 110 million renters in the United States. That is a huge, huge financial, you know, stimulus, if you will. And we often think about it as, you know, it could be more money than even, you know, tax breaks that, you know, everybody in Washington is always thinking about. This is a way that you can really unlock $45 billion and give renters back their money so that they can do something with it, whether that's, you know, again, save or, you know, invested or, you know, manage other life expenses. And at the micro level, you know, I think it's never been more clear than what we've seen happening in the last 8 or 9 months now, living in the new kind of COVID reality or dream sequence that we're in, where you're very much seeing front and center how important personal finance is for every single type of person in the country. You know, it doesn't matter where you live or how much money you make. You are feeling COVID and some sort of economic uncertainty, you know, very much, and giving people a different way of, you know, essentially reclaiming a whole bunch of cash that they otherwise, you know, would just have to put into these escrow accounts with landlords is really meaningful, even at the individual level.
And I guess for someone to qualify for this, you know, could it be literally the everyday sort of man and women to use your product?
Yeah, that's right. So think about it, you know, as a choice, right? Our goal is really thinking about the service and the product we provide as creating a new option for a resident, for a renter that never existed before. You know, they've always had to just kind of follow the rules of this is the way it's done. It must be 1 month cash security deposit that you put into this, locked account, and maybe you'll get it back. Maybe you won't get it back. Who knows? But really, if you think about it, when you do that and you're a renter, when you move into that next home, even if you move out of the first place, you never really get that money back because you've already left a deposit for your next home. Right. Yeah. And so it's just kind of money that's just rolling in the background somewhere that you as a renter really never have access to for as long as you're renting. And, that's a real challenge.
Yeah, I guess it gives people slightly more opportunity and, like you said, choice. It's fairly frustrating when you sort of know the full upfront cost you're going to have to get put out, and then you don't know where it's going to go. Obviously, you found a huge problem, and I guess a way how to sort of tackle it. Housing affordability is everywhere. Is there, I guess, looking at sort of other, public-private partnerships, how can we sort of create benefits for everyone involved? How have you sort of addressed that?
Sure. So I think that's a really important thing to understand or take away about what Rhino does. And, we are not out there suggesting that this is the holy grail for housing affordability, right? Housing affordability is a big, ugly, scary topic that, quite frankly, is going to require many, many people, whether they're in the private sector or, in state houses or city councils or, in Washington, to kind of help address. But what we feel that we're able to provide is a really important part of that solution, right? Like, even if there's 50 things or 100 things that we all kind of need to kind of come together to sort of bring to bear to tackle this broader issue around housing affordability, the most sort of interesting part about what we've brought to the marketplace is that simply by updating the way business is done, really like letting insurance do what it's designed to do to protect people from, something that may or may not happen in the future. Insurance is the most efficient way to do it. And that lets us really take a transaction level efficiency that has savings and distribute that back to both renters and landlords, which makes them both better off. And that's what I think is really important about this kind of win-win concept, that in fact, it's making business better and life easier for landlords and property managers, and at the very same time making life easier and more affordable for renters. And that's really, I think, a powerful concept to bring to bear, whereas oftentimes, I think, especially in, kind of the housing topics, it always tends to be one-sided. Folks come up with things or have policies or agendas that only benefit, say, the developers building high-rise buildings in Los Angeles or New York versus, programs that solely benefit renters, in certain pockets, whereas this is genuinely about a technology-driven gain that lets us just create value for both sides.
Yeah, it's not often that you see a product or service that has benefactors on both sides. And you're almost making insurance quite appealing and quite sexy. Now, if we're looking at, say, the insurance industry, it's you tackled what's notorious for being an incredibly regulated industry. What advice can you give to founders who are thinking about entering the space and fearful, maybe quite rightly so, of the barriers to entry?
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid. You should embrace it. And, just bring the right people into the room. One of the things that I often get frustrated by is seeing the 1,000,001 ideas that come out of Silicon Valley that are really just focused on tackling what I would call sort of made up problems. I sometimes joke about it as like an Alexa enabled juicer, and that's all well and good, but really, does the world need another Alexa enabled juicer? The reason industries are regulated, the reason real estate and housing and, insurance are regulated industries is because they're actually the most important things in people's lives. And therefore, government has stepped in to kind of put some rules into place. And so I would really just encourage folks to get after it And hey, I'd be happy to be a resource to anybody looking at getting into starting a business in a regulated space. It's not for the faint of heart, but at the same time, there is huge opportunity to really build large businesses that really do have impact for, hundreds of millions of people.
This is more of a sort of personal question. What has the transition been from, I guess, across your career from, say, graduating to investment banking to being directly involved in the property management and development space to creating, obviously, Rhino and founding a business and tackling, front on the problems you've been experiencing? How was that whole journey for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. And I guess what I'll say is, I don't think I ever had all the answers or nor do I claim to have all the answers today. But something for me that's always been, pretty clear is to kind of keep moving and keep making progress going forward. And what I mean by that is, even just in my own sort of personal self-discovery, right? I knew pretty quickly into my time at Goldman Sachs when I started in investment banking, that I was solving hard problems and getting up to speed on how to do that job as best as possible and really mastering, that part of the business that I was in. But after that, I realized, I just wasn't that passionate about it. And so I've always approached these things as kind of, cross them off the list as opposed to sort of feeling a little bit more complacent, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is the lack of sort of knowing what the next step is or knowing that the next step is the perfect step, the lack of awareness around that shouldn't deter people from trying and just moving along and continuing to try to figure out what's next for them. And that's why really I think, in hindsight, it's a much, much different kind of narrative for me to understanding how all these different areas that I've touched kind of have brought us to where we are with Rhino. And being a property owner for the last 8 years, I think is obviously a great place to be for anybody that's starting a business in a property, industry. And so I think very literally having managed, 250 rentals and having been in the, driver's seat of move-ins, move-outs, lease breaks, landlord-tenant, disputes, the whole nine, really kind of gave me a very clear firsthand understanding of just exactly what some of the challenges are when it comes to security deposits that landlords experience, not just renters. And I think that's often one thing that often gets overlooked is that it's fairly obvious what we do for renters, making it more affordable for them to move in and live in the homes they want. But the other side of the story, it's a pretty, ugly side of the story on the landlord and property management side, whereas they don't love dealing with security deposits. There's lots of challenges there. And this is a really meaningful opportunity to sort of get away from that.
Yeah, I often think people assume the renters are the most badly hit by it, but I guess dealing with that as well is probably it's another thing for a landlord to worry about.
And that's exactly why it's so silly, right? Like it's this sort of archaic way of doing business that's kind of nobody likes, but yet has persisted.
Going back into chatting through about renters, and we haven't touched upon the sort of C word. I, for one, we've just gone back into lockdown in the UK, which is brilliant. What are you seeing in the market? Do you think renters are struggling more post-COVID? I probably shouldn't say post, during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'll say, though, is it's not just renters, it's everybody struggling more. And that's the kind of wildest part about, the current situation we're in. But renters in the United States, at its peak, with something like 40 million unemployment claims in across the country, obviously this has had an impact. And so I think, the jury is out still on sort of where this will all shake out. But what we've noticed now that, we've had a few months of speaking with our partners in the industry and also renters firsthand is that it's a very uneven story. And that's one of the, kind of most I would say, challenging parts of this is it's not a one size fits all problem, and it's not a one size fits all remedy. And I mean that, in a few different ways with respect to geography, even, right? So New York City was one of the hardest hit places early on, yet now seems to be kind of holding relatively strong with keeping, infection rates lower than in some other parts of the country. However, due to its density in 8 or 9 million people, it is struggling to get back to work, which means renters in New York City who may work in, offices or other service industries or what have you, are more disproportionately hard hit than in other areas. And so I think it's really, a story about sort of what are the many ways this is going to unfold, over the next, I'd say 5 years. Anybody who thinks this is, kind of next summer, we're all back to business as usual, or renting is back to business as usual, that's not realistic.
Yeah, fairly wishful thinking. I think we can definitely agree on that. So what's sort of next for Rhino? What's any sort of focus for 2021 and the next sort of few years?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing and what's happened is, as this topic of housing affordability and just what we do for folks is taken hold, even more than when we started the year because of, just what's happening in the economic picture. And so we see a huge opportunity to kind of continue to go after expanding education and awareness for what we do across the country. There's some 43 million rental homes just in the United States, and we're in about 1 million of them and growing, but that's a lot more homes for us to, get in front of. And the other thing I would say is it's been pretty amazing to watch what's happening in terms of the public response to, security deposit insurance over the last year. And we've partnered now with many stakeholders across the country looking to understand how insurance as an alternative to cash deposits can really play an important role in addressing this housing affordability question. And so we've seen legislation pass in 2 cities already this year. One just before COVID in Cincinnati, Ohio, which passed the Renters' Choice and Flexibility Act, which requires owners to offer alternatives like insurance to renters that move in. And then just a few weeks ago, it actually was passed in Atlanta. And so we've been working very closely with mayors and legislators on helping them understand how insurance is able to play a role in this. And we've been really, encouraged, quite frankly, by the head of steam that this has picked up. And I anticipate that in 2021, there'll be at least another dozen cities based on the folks we're talking to and folks that are asking for our input on this that, are going to be passing similar legislation.
Well, yeah, fingers crossed for that. That was sort of leading me into my next question, which you kind of covered. What sort of partnerships would you be looking for? But then also, are there any partnerships you would look for in some other technologies out there within real estate for your product?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, what we've come to learn is that focusing on the resident is really kind of numero uno, and it's also number 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the folks out there in the industry that know that are the ones that are constantly looking forward to how to deliver more and more value to residents. It is getting an increasingly, sort of competitive environment on the business side for landlords and property managers to really deliver best in class service. And the importance of financial amenities like what we offer is now so front and center. And so what I'll say about, sort of partnerships for us, it's largely about sort of education and awareness that this is the new default way that people want to rent in America, and connecting ourselves with folks that also are thinking about the renter and the resident and the experience that's being delivered directly to them above everything else, are absolutely the folks that we'd love to, work more closely with. And so that could be, anybody that's touching a renter either before move in or after move in or later in their life, right? I mean, and I think one of the big things we sort of focus on is that it's a holistic view for, how we are engaging with resident or a resident customer.
And I guess this also leads us on to, as we're coming to the end of the show, how do people engage with you and how do they engage with Rhino when they want to sort of find out a little bit more about your about your business?
You can visit us at sayrhino.com to learn about us and what we do. It's pretty straightforward in terms of the renter experience. It typically takes about a minute for a renter who's moving into a deposit-free home with Rhino to pop in and answer a few questions, get a quote, and then purchase insurance for their rental instead of plopping down a big security deposit. And yeah.
Well, to me, that seems like an absolute no-brainer for any of those renters out there. And before we come to the end of the podcast, is there any bit of parting advice you'd like to give to our listeners?
I would just say be optimistic about, the road ahead. I know everybody, at least at this moment here, sitting on Monday, November 2nd, tomorrow's election day in the United States. And so there's a lot of focus on that. But now is the time to really kind of dig in and focus on sort of where there is opportunity to create value for customers, and, having a sort of firm view on what that means, I think lets you kind of get ahead, as long as you can kind of detach from, what some of the, what I'll call sort of pandemonium is of the moment.
Well, look, thank you very much, Paraag, for coming on the podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing about your business, and best of luck for 2021. And I'll catch up with you after the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Propcast, and a big thanks to our special guests. Make sure you visit our website, www.lmre.co.uk, where you can subscribe to our show, or you'll find us on iTunes and Spotify, where all good content is found. Whilst you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate if you could rate and review us on iTunes, or if you simply just spread the word. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday, and I'll catch you later.
You're listening to a Podcast Company podcast. This was made by Podcast Syndicator, where we help you go from start to grow to making money with your podcast. Let us help you share your message and your voice with the world. Reach out now, Jason at podcastsyndicator.com or Brett at podcastsyndicator.com to find out more. Thank you for listening, and do come back to hear nothing but the best podcasts.